Trio with its refreshing major mode. And we are now back to the gloom of the opening. The conventional thing to do now in a three-part ABA movement would be to repeat the first part, add on an ending, and call it a day. But not Beethoven, never Beethoven. He returns to his A section, but he is only beginning to tell his secrets. We are all expecting simply to hear the theme again, perhaps shortened this time, as is the custom, since it is such a long theme to begin with. But no, it has seeds of development that are unlooked for. And so, without warning of any kind, it breaks out into a fugal passage of the utmost tension and power. And so we are again caught up in Beethoven's magic, instead of simply hearing out the repeat of the melody. Then when the fugue is over, and the tension has died down to the whispered hush of the opening, we are faced with the prospect of hearing the whole tune again at last. But what happens? The melody has barely begun when it trails up and off in a wisp of smoke, and suddenly, wham! It is the only thing that could and should have happened. Again, at a moment of supposed relaxation, we have been nailed to our seats by Beethoven's crushing force and almost superhuman timing. The third great surprise in this movement is in the coda. Beethoven has finally finished all the restatements of the march theme, and we have a feeling of what now and of the approaching end. But just at this moment, he again injects some of that divine stimulant, goes into an utterly foreign key, and in the very simplest way, and the most unexpected, gives us a moment of such rare peace and radiance as makes us want to kneel in humility and reverence. And finally, the last time we hear the march melody, instead of a simple restatement, we literally see it break up into fragments before our eyes, like the speech of one so overcome by grief that he can speak only in halting, gasping efforts. We have just been examining what are perhaps the two greatest movements in all symphonic music. Many critics, even ones who adore Beethoven, feel that the Eroica symphony begins to falter here, since the ensuing two movements cannot possibly measure up to the first two. They may be right in a superficial sense, that almost anything would seem anticlimactic after that gargantuan first movement plus the grandiloquent funeral march. But in a deeper sense, Beethoven was right and they are wrong. For with his great sense of timing and just pacing, he knew that the hearer needed relief at this point, relief at least from the quantitative grandeurs of the two preceding movements. And he therefore gives us now a rather short and driving scherzo, which is eminently fitting. But the qualitative grandeur is retained. The scherzo is alive with shocks and tremors as of a deep subterranean disturbance. What is it that gives this music such a quality of chained power and pent-up tension? The scherzo is written in the meter of a fast 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You recall that we spoke earlier of the natural accent falling on 1 each time. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and so on. But here, Beethoven, by alternating two different chords beat by beat, gives us the impression of a meter of 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. This duple alternation tends to cancel out the triple feeling of the meter in which it is embedded, so that we are left with a sense of neither duple nor triple. Instead, we feel an ambivalence which tends to make all the beats equal, as though it were 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and so on. At this swift tempo, and in so soft and dry a dynamic, the resulting effect is one of tremendous repressed power, like the first rumblings of an earthquake. For this succession of equally strong beats, following each other with machine gun rapidity, conveys to us the feeling of a series of downbeats, as if a whole bar of music were compressed into each tiny beat. And it is this compression that makes the tension. Such compression must eventually erupt, but not before Beethoven is held out as long as possible, building the tension almost unbearably by refusing to release this power. Finally, it can hold out no longer, and the inevitable explosion occurs. How right and satisfying, even though shocking, this explosion is. Again, Beethoven is working with his private telephone line to heaven, with his almost supernatural sense of what must happen when. And this rightness, once and for all, dispels any doubts about the fitness of the scherzo. It may be shorter than the preceding two movements, but it continues in the same great vein of qualitative grandeur and almost terrifying perception of truth. The trio, or middle section of the scherzo, is based on a difficult fanfare for the three horns, which is every horn player's nightmare. The first horn is led perilously close to his extreme upper limit, while the lower horns have scampering exercises in their lowest registers, where the horn is least able to scamper. But Beethoven gives no quarter. The horn players are not to be considered as people, but as instruments, enlisted in the service of God. And Beethoven's fanfare could never be just another hunting call. It must reach the very heavens with no consideration at all for the prestige of Mr. Smith or Mr. Schwartz, who is actually blowing the horn. So up it goes, comes Smith or Schwartz. One splendidly typical shock in this movement should be noted. At one point, Beethoven has distorted the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 meter by his old trick of pounding the second beat, so that it goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But when this section returns after the trio, he makes one further distortion and changes the meter completely to a duple one for 4 short bars. in the middle of a scherzo which is otherwise all in 3. I call this typical not because Beethoven is given to changing meter in midstream, but because it reveals that larger daring, that extra thrust that takes him beyond the limits of every other composer's art. All that we have said is equally true of the fourth and final movement. It is not difficult to refute those critics who claim that it makes a weak ending to a powerful work. It is actually a finale of hidden power and deceptive simplicity. Is it so hard to recognize this power because it comes from such basic material? Perhaps so. We are again in the presence of the great mystery, Beethoven starting with a bare bugle call fact, the absolute essence of musical simplicity and truth, and erecting upon it a complex superstructure embracing all human experience. The basic element is made of these 4 notes. Nothing can be simpler. It is not even so complex as a triad, since it outlines only 2 notes of the triad, not 3. Yet out of these 2 notes, which are then repeated backwards, he evolves a series of variations to stagger the hearer. For Beethoven has written no ordinary set of variations. First of all, he doesn't begin immediately with the theme, but opens instead with a furious rush of sound in the wrong key, as though a raging giant had stormed into the room. By the end of this raging, we have been prepared for the right key, our home ground of E-flat, and the basic theme is stated, or should one say understated, deliberately presented as a rather trivial thought ticked off by the pizzicato strings. Trivial, perhaps, but only to make the ensuing developments of it the more amazing. Little by little, tonal body is added, counterpoint develops, motion increases, until by the 3rd variation we are ready for those 4 notes to blossom out into a full-blown melody, which seems in its optimism and bright freshness to belong in the open air. And if you listen closely, you can hear our old friendly 4 notes standing proudly in the bass, holding the new melody up. At this point, all resemblance to the pure variation form ceases. True, the movement does remain a set of variations, but each one now becomes a new and extraordinary object, no longer bound to the classical tradition of a certain number of bars or a constant harmonic pattern or mere adornment of the theme. For example, the 4th variation at which we have now arrived turns out to be a new kind of struggle, a rough-hewn and somber fugue based on the original 4 notes, but now set in a moody minor. By the end of this fugue section, we have reached a climax of tension.